extraordinary. On many fronts. One, it's the first public show we've had in 24 months. It's the first time in a long time where we actually streamed it, so there's a significant audience that wasn't physically there. So if you look, even I had to get used to what Kristen was doing, because she's the ringmaster of starting, stopping, and all of a sudden, starting on time.
Good job.
Yeah, did a great job. And we gave a time that normally when we do it without streaming, I'm pretty casual about we're going to go when we go, when I want to go. But that didn't happen today. All of a sudden, I'm in the middle of doing this, and boom, we're gone. So thank you for putting up with me. This is Cold War, and all three of you came from different areas of it all, and of course, you lived on the other side of the curtain, if you will. And Nancy, you wrote a biography of it. And you were on the other side of the curtain in West Germany. Of course, Eli has been a prosecutor of folks. I think it's going to go seriatim here and then start with you, Arthur. What's your sense of today? I mean, was there something you may have learned, or something that maybe this group will watch 4 hours of this might walk away from?
I enjoyed the general's talk so much. I had read
you already heard me.
book, and we were neighbors together for years.
Right.
So her talk was not new to me. But to hear the general's report on what it was like to live on the other side of that time, because we've seen several German TV stories of that period there, and I had an old friend whose family was from East Germany, in the Harz,
Beautiful town.
and they sent one of their daughters to school in West Berlin to protect her, and she could come home every once in a while, and the wall went up, and she couldn't get out in West Berlin. And so she made it with relatives in West Germany. Her sister remained in Friedrichsburg, and they both developed in different directions.
Wow.
One became a Vesti, and the other was an Aussie, and it destroyed their personal relationship, because the one from East Germany was a dedicated communist and thought that was the system, and it was just awful to see that happen personally in a personal, tragic way. So I was particularly interested in your comments about the system.
David, I know we talked a little bit about the East German reaction to Klaus Fuchs and your sense of him there as a figure, a historical figure.
I'm not really very familiar with Fuchs. I have to read your book, but what I find fascinating, Klaus Fuchs is his very special story, one of not too few people who thought East Germany would be a good place to be. I mean, he had his own reasons to go there, but there were others who were with quite an enthusiasm went there to see a new model of a society, and they believed very much that this would be the right way for the people who need to develop and to have a more equal society. And I heard you said it a little bit. He had his problems when he realized in which direction this country went very, very quickly in the 50s with the Stalinism and all of this. And you have quite a lot of stories like Klaus Fuchs, not very well awakening the reality after a while.
Mm-hmm.
Is this right?
Yes, that is absolutely right. Yes. Yeah.
So Nancy, you heard a little bit from your neighbor Arthur, and of course David, and even Eli today.
Yes.
Is there anything sort of new to you?
Well, having written 2 biographies in a lot of depth about this time period, not so much after 1950, but all the other parts. And I've personally spent over the last 25 years, since 1996, I've been going to Berlin several times a year, and now I have a daughter who lives there, and I go to see her as well. And I have, most of my friends grew up in East Berlin, and I was interested in what David had to say because I was taking, as I told him, I was thinking through their stories and see how it meshed with what he experienced. So that was of interest to me because his is very different than the other couple, 3, 4 people I know who grew up there. Although they did have trouble with university. Actually, Klaus Fuchs's great nephew couldn't get into university for a while because he had said that his uncle, Klaus, had been a spy, and they weren't willing to hear it. So when he said that in his interview, I think it was at Humboldt, they wouldn't take him. And it was a big to-do. I mean, he finally went to college, but it all had to be cleared up. So it wasn't just, I mean, things just happened that way. But on what Bart was talking about, I wasn't around in those years, and I thought it was just fascinating. I mean, I knew the story of Hess, kind of, and I knew that he was sitting there, and there were four different powers involved. But I loved his explanation, and I just, spending so much time there myself, and having all these little pieces that come in. I mean, there were lots of most of the big pieces I knew, but there were little pieces and I can't even tell you which ones they were, that just kind of, by osmosis now, they've become part of what I understand about Berlin. And it is a fascinating city with many different faces. And it's just amazing, the whole area.
This may be a little off topic, but maybe not. A lot of publicity even today about the continued prosecution of Nazis, often justified for the let's never forget, when in fact sometimes you'd say let's move on. Sort of, perhaps you were dealing with that, and dealing with the files of Stasi as, when do we say when? And I'm just kind of curious as to maybe your personal reflections on, as you're a 96-year-old person,
Yeah, the secretary
who ran away or got lost in a subway, got pulled back, and I got a lot of publicity. Art, do you get a sense, I mean, you were in Spandau, and that, sort of 96-year-old person continue to be prosecuted?
Well, I think those who were prosecuted at Nuremberg and served in Spandau deserved it,
Sure.
and that's perfectly fine. I don't know enough about the ones you read about now, and I find it a bit stretching if somebody was a secretary or a maintenance worker at Auschwitz, really didn't have anything to do, and certainly had no control or authority or decision, and was 87 years old. It's time to turn the page.
Nancy?
But that's probably a heretical view of what.
As much as I know what's been in the newspaper, and this person was 17 or 18 years old, and she did push papers, and she would do what she was told. But I had the same reaction as Art. I thought that it was, even if it had been 30 years ago, and that's what she had done. I mean, I think of myself or my children as in high school and being told to do something. I have a hard time seeing her being put in jail for something like that when you see those people in the paperclip project. I mean, you can't compare in that way. Just because someone got off here doesn't mean that someone should get off there. But you do also need to look at it in context. And I can't see them going after this woman at this point. If in fact what's in the newspaper is what's actually accurate. That's my feeling.
It draws attention to Germany right now because they were very much delayed in recognizing the prosecution of fellow countrymen. I mean, that's known, that's a fact, and really started in the 60s when they started prosecutions, and here they, for a variety of reasons, have continued that. And I don't know if you could speak to that at all. I know you're somewhat of official capacity, but
No, I mean, it's obvious. That it took way too long that it really had the big processes against Auschwitz, the people who served in Auschwitz and the other concentration camps. It took more than 15 years. There's no excuse for that, yes? And it took another 5-6 years that the society started to really get it, thanks to the young generation who didn't want to keep up with this. Yeah, there were missed chances and a reluctance also in the judiciary for whatever reason. I'm very sure it is not easy to bring a case like the one of the secretary to the courts. Maybe the prosecutors are a little more brave today to do it, I don't know. And maybe it's also, that's my personal explanation, not my official explanation. I didn't ask anybody about this. But maybe part of bad conscience about what happened or what didn't happen 30, 40 years ago, and that you say, okay, there is a last chance to do something, to serve justice, even though we know this woman won't get to jail. She is way too old, but it should be in the interest of the victims, it should be at least heard. And that I can understand, but
I can hear the hearing.
I'm totally with you that the case itself, compared with what wasn't prosecuted by the hundreds of thousands, and now that could be seen a little bit arbitrary. But we should see the whole picture.
You know, a friend of mine who grew up in East Berlin, close to the wall, is now about 45. He's very smart, had a great education, he's a physicist, now he's in business. But we have talked about the Holocaust, and he told me, this was in East Berlin, it'd be interesting what you know differently, that he knows nothing about it. He is never in school, when he was in grade school, high school, it was not part of his education, and he knows very little about it. He, as an adult, because he's very smart and reads a lot, he knows, what happened, and he doesn't deny it or anything like that. But he just was never educated about it, because I wanted him to read part of what I had written about Berlin and all, and he said he couldn't, he could read it, but he couldn't give me any opinion because he didn't know anything about it.
But that was a big difference between West and East Germany. In West Germany, Holocaust, Third Reich, etc. was taught extensively. In East Germany, I remember this too, in East Germany, the story of the Third Reich was basically, I simplify. The Nazis began the war and brought terror over the world and killed 20 million Soviets?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was,
20 million
yeah,
Soviets.
yeah.
The good guys were the communists, and they were the ones who went into the concentration camps. Yes, some Jews were killed too, but the Holocaust didn't play a role. It was really the role of the communists, and the good guys were also the Soviet Union, the Red Army, who made an end of this and freed us and led us to a new society. And by the way, in East Germany, there are only righteous people. In West Germany, that's with Adenauer on top. Those are all the Nazis.
That sounds like American politics.
Yeah. But this was what we were taught, very simplified, what we were taught about this period of time. And it was, again, the churches where they talked about Kristallnacht, about things like this, also late, in the 70s they started. But all these stories I heard only in my congregation, and
The West Germans had a wonderful program years ago where they would invite German immigrants from the United States to come back to their home in West Germany and talk to students what it was like to be a Jew in Mainz or in Frankfurt or someplace. And I have several friends who participated and went back. And it was such a superb way of exposing what was going on by having these human beings show up and say, let me tell you what it was like to be 10 years old here. And just a superb program. I don't think there was anything like that in East Germany.
no, not at all. I mean, those were Americans. They could tell them the wrong things. No, and why should we? We were not the Nazis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was really this attitude. By the way, that's a big part of my job, to reach out to these people. So the Holocaust survivors are still alive in New York. I'm very close to many of them, and it is fascinating their stories they tell and how they go back to the cities where they grew up and tell the students their stories. And by the way, that's also interesting. Some of them become in their old age German citizens.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago, I had in my office a woman, 97 years old, born in 1924 in Berlin. And I handed her over the repatriation document.
Yeah.
So we have a provision in our constitution that all those who lost their citizenship during the Third Reich and their descendant are entitled to regain German citizenship without any preconditions. And there are about 400 every year in New York who apply for that, and then, every year. And so I had, last year I had 3 generations came to me. Father, son, and daughter, and their children, and they became German citizens again, which of course for me as a German representative here is also very fulfilling and humbling too. That they trust the country, they betrayed them in this way, and that they want to become German citizens again.
So you're here in New York recruiting Americans to go back to Germany. Now it's clear.
They are allowed to keep their American citizenship.
Are they?
And they mostly have 3 citizenships. Israel, America, and Germany.
Oh.
Just to add on to that, it is not connected for the same reason, but I see, because of my biography of Max Born, I'm very close to his family in London, cousins, nephew, I mean everybody, children, grandchildren, and they have all gotten German citizenship because of Brexit.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's exploded, and all of them to a person, and just that family is dozens. I mean, when you look at all
Well,
It's
I know
different.
David's got to run, and but thank you. This has been extraordinary, and to be able, frankly, for us at the Jackson Center to touch the hem. You talk about touching the person, where all of you have distinctively unique experiences, and for us to have you here, not just read about it, but to actually have you here is the real bonus. And on behalf of the Jackson Center, thank you.
Thank you.